Okay, so we're looking at passive. We've been looking at the passive all week. I think we probably all feel quite confident with what the passive is. Yeah. So I think that we're quite confident about that. So what we introduced yesterday was not just the simple passive. It was this idea of direct and indirect objects, if you remember, direct and indirect objects. So what I'd like to do is review that. Very, very quickly, we'll review the passive. Then we'll have a look at this direct and indirect objects. And then I want you guys to do some work for me. Okay, so let's go and open the study document, which is here. Yeah, okay, so we were talking about the passive. All of these are the passive. How do I know that all of these are the passive?
From past participle form of the verb.
Yeah, and?
Was.
And to be.
To be
Yeah,
plus.
yeah. So the passive is made from be
plus past
participle. Okay, and we looked at this yesterday and we said that 3 and 6 were okay, but the others weren't. Okay, so the passive is be plus the past participle. We know that. We use this when we're trying to focus on what happens to the object and not what the subject does. Because if we just quickly think about that, subjects do things, that's the active. Objects receive verbs. So when we use the passive, what we're trying to do is we're trying to focus on what happens to the object. But unfortunately, there are multiple types of objects, and we've got direct and we've got indirect. A direct object receives an action. It's a noun which receives an action. Paul kicked the football. The football is the direct object of the verb kick. Okay. Nitesh ate a sandwich. Nitesh is the subject. Ate is the verb. A sandwich is the direct object. Okay. Now, what if I said Paul made dinner for his wife? Well, now I've got Paul made dinner. Okay, well, dinner is the direct object, isn't it?
Yeah.
My wife is the indirect object. It was for her. She benefited from it. So I've got this sentence with multiple objects in. I wouldn't say my wife was made. That would start to sound a bit strange. Okay. Now, there are some verbs where it's really possible to do that. Okay, so if we look again at give, I can say Mrs. Edwards was given 10 minutes, or I can say 10 minutes were given. So I can focus on the indirect object with that verb to give, or I can focus on the direct one. But other verbs like explain that we looked at yesterday doesn't work that way. They're different. So let's go into some detail about that now. I've got a number of different verbs. Okay, I've got give, explain, prescribe, discuss, insert, inject, diagnose, provide, prepare, and notify. And I'd be interested to see how we do in groups making sentences. So let's look at this table. Okay, first of all, let's take these two here. Okay, these two here in this section, we'll put this all in, actually, let's put this all in green. Okay, it's the green section that we're looking at. So if we look at the table, we've got the verb here on the left. Then I've got direct object in this line and indirect object in this line. In this column, we've got active, and in this column, we've got passive. Asia, do you have a question?
Yes, Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry. Indirect object is always a human being, or?
No, it could be a dog, or it could be an organization, or it could be anything that can receive a benefit from another action.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So let's have a look. This sentence here, it's in the direct object line and it's in the active column. Okay, now how do we know that for sure? So let's go. Hussein, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Hussein, how do I know that this sentence is active?
Because there is no be and past participle.
That's a really good answer. Yeah. So let's analyze the sentence. The nurse, what's that?
The subject,
Subject. Gave, what's that?
the verb.
The verb. The leaflet, what's that?
The leaflet is the object,
It's the direct
the
object.
direct object, yeah.
Yeah. And Mr. Smith
You must say
is
that's indirect object.
indirect object. Okay, so we said yesterday that the verb give is very flexible.
Mm.
So if I stay active, what's my first word going to be?
Mr. Smith,
No.
the
Active.
leaflet,
No. It's always got to start with a
Subject.
subject, hasn't it? So the nurse gave. What's the indirect object?
Mr.
Mr. Smith.
The leaflet,
The leaflet.
the leaflet. Yeah.
Okay, now does that sound right to you?
No.
Why not? What's wrong with it?
First gave Smith.
Yeah, it's right. I think.
Yeah, it is.
Fine.
It is. Yeah, it's right.
Fine, yeah. Okay. So let's look what we did. We said this is the subject. We said this is the verb. And we've done the same thing again, subject verb. So that means that it's an active
It's still active.
sentence. But what we've done is here, what followed the verb was the direct object. Okay. But here, what followed the verb was the indirect object, wasn't it? So here gave the leaflet, and here gave Mr. Smith the leaflet. The leaflet goes to the end here. Mr. Smith is at the end on this one. So what we're saying is that the verb to give is very flexible. If I wanted to put that into the passive, Hussein,
Yes.
okay,
Now you're saying what the leaflet.
I'd start with the leaflet because that's my direct object.
Yeah, direct
Yeah.
object. Yeah.
The leaflet
Be to be
Was-
because given
given
to
to
Mr. Smith by nurse.
by the
by-
nurse, but I'm not going to put the nurse in.
Okay.
Okay. But what if I wanted to use the passive with the indirect object? I would start with
The
indirect object.
Mr. Smith
Mr. Smith, whoops, was
was
given
given
the leaflet.
the leaflet. Yeah.
Okay, now all of these are fine. Give is a special verb in English. I'm going to make this box bright green. That tells me that I can do all four. I can do active sentences where I focus on the direct object and the indirect object, and I can do passive sentences where I focus on the indirect and the direct object. Both of them are fine. But explain's not the same, is it? We said that yesterday. Explain is not the same. So let's look at explain instead. This one can go back to white. We're happy with that. That's good. Let's look at explain. And I'll prove to you why this should be red. Okay. Green, it's super flexible. Explain, red, it's not. So direct object. Let's go with, let's go Sophia. Are you there? Sophia.
Yes, Paul.
Hi,
Good morning.
Sophia. Okay.
Yes.
So this one's an active sentence, isn't it?
Yes,
How do you know it's active?
because the nurse explained
Okay.
the instruction.
That's
Yes, the nurse.
subject verb, isn't it?
Yes, the
Verb. Okay. Now let's do what we just did up here. And this, guys, is what I want you to do in your groups in a moment. Let's look at
Okay.
this one underneath. Can I do it with the indirect object after the verb? How would that go? We'd start with the nurse, wouldn't we?
something that the nurse
Yep.
let's say the nurse
And the verb
the verb explain
explained.
to
Hmm.
Mr. Smith.
Well,
The nurse explained
let's just put the indirect object. Mr. Smith,
mhm,
the,
the instruction.
well, what do you think about that, Sophia?
The nurse explained Mr. Smith the instruction of
It, yeah, it's Something strange.
It's not
It's
right.
strange.
We can't do it. So
Yeah.
explain. What we're saying with explain is you can use it with a direct object, but you can't use it with an indirect.
Indirect.
Okay, let's put it into the passive. Let's put it into the passive.
Yep.
Pull this up here.
So I think
So
we say the
the direct object we're looking for, which would be,
instruction.
yeah, the instructions. Okay. The instructions
Was given to Mr. Smith.
Were
Okay.
explained.
Remember that we always have to think of what happens to the verb to be in the passive. It's were, isn't it? Were explained.
Explained to Mr. Smith.
Okay. What do you think of that sentence, Sophia?
I think it's okay. The
It's good,
instruction
isn't
were
it?
explained to Mr. Smith. Yeah, it's
Good. So what we've done here is we've focused on the direct object. That means the direct object comes immediately after the verb. So direct object comes after the verb here, and the instructions, now it's the direct object, is at the
Direct
beginning,
object.
because that's what we do with the passive, isn't it? We put the object at the beginning.
Yes.
So I can do it, the direct object in the active and the passive for explain. But if I put it into the passive, it would be Mr. Smith,
Was given the instruction.
same verb, was
Explain.
explained. Because was given is fine.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Was explained.
The instructions.
The instruction.
Okay. Now, that's not allowed. We can't do that. We can't say Mr. Smith was explaining the instructions, unfortunately. So that's why this one's red, because these two here you cannot do. You can't do that. Explain is not as flexible as the verb to give. Give is very flexible. You can use it with direct and indirect objects, but explain you cannot. Okay, thanks, Sophia. Akhtar, have you got a question?
Need the difference between instruction and explain.
Well, instruction's a noun and explain is a verb.
So it's not like in part A is not synonym for each other.
Well, they're different types of words. So you could say instructed, okay, to instruct. Okay, that's a verb. To explain is a verb. Okay, what's the noun? Instruction.
Explanation.
Explanation is a noun. Now, they're not quite the same thing, but they are similar. But to instruct is to say, this is how you should do it. But explaining is just saying how something works. So for instance, I'll give you some instructions now, Akhtar. Get up at 7 a.m., brush your teeth, and then I want you to clean the whole house. All right, that's an instruction. That's me instructing you. If I say an explanation, I would say, the way I want you to clean the front room is by using a Hoover. And maybe you could use a duster for the wood. Because when you use a duster for the wood, it makes the wood all shiny. I'm explaining now.
Okay, it's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, the different things. Okay, so let's do another one, because we did those two yesterday. Let's do another one that we haven't done before. Let's look at prescribe. Okay, now, again, I've given us already a sentence here. Okay, let's push this down here. I've given us a sentence, which is the doctor prescribed paracetamol for Mr. Smith. First of all, what are the objects? That's what we're going to ask. So I'm going to ask, let's go for Petruzza. Are you there? No, no Petruzza. Let's go. Mariam, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Mariam. Okay, so what are the nouns in this sentence?
So Mr. Smith is the noun.
That's a noun, yeah.
Yes. And the subject is doctor.
Yeah, that's a noun, yeah. Any other nouns?
Paracetamol.
Paracetamol. Okay, great. Now, those three are nouns. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Which ones are the objects?
Mr. Smith is the object.
That's an object. Yeah. Any other objects?
Indirect.
Prescribe.
Paracetamol is the
Paracetamol.
indirect object.
It's the other way around. It's
Yes.
the other way around. Because prescribe is here. That's a verb followed by an object, isn't it? That's what often happens. Subject, verb, object. So-
Okay.
The doctor is the subject followed by the verb. What did they prescribe? They prescribed
Paracetamol object.
paracetamol. Okay, that's great. So that means that I can say the doctor prescribed paracetamol for Mr. Smith. And I've introduced the indirect object with this prepositional phrase, like we often do, to up here, to here as well. So the doctor prescribed paracetamol for Mr. Smith. Do you think that I can put that into the passive?
Yes, paracetamol was.
Yeah?
No, I think it doesn't make sense.
No, it does. It does. Finish the
Paracetamol
sentence.
was prescribed
Yeah.
to Mr. Smith by doctor. By
I
the
would put for Mr. Smith.
by the doctor.
We don't need the subject here.
Okay.
With the passive, we don't have to do it. So what have we just learned, guys? We've just learned that you can use prescribe with a direct object in the active and in the passive. So that's good. That's good. The next thing we need to think is, well, can I use it with the indirect object? And Mariam, you just said the indirect object was Mr. Smith, didn't you?
Yes.
So if I wanted to do that in the active, I'd have to start with the doctor, wouldn't I? Because the doctor's the subject. I've got prescribed, that's the verb. Now, what would come next if I wanted to put the indirect object?
The doctor to Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
No.
Now, generally, I would put a preposition here with
Yeah, with paracetamol.
paracetamol. So this is, we're going to see lots of little things here that these prepositions and how they change from sentence to sentence. But okay, the doctor prescribed Mr. Smith with paracetamol. As a class, answer me, are you happy with that sentence?
No.
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 Yes, it is.
Lots of no's there. That's interesting. Well, let me tell you guys, I'm happy.
Yeah, it's indirect.
I'm happy with it. So
Because it is
well,
active.
let's wait. I'm starting to think prescribe is one of these verbs that could be green. I'm starting to think that I could do it in the passive as well. Okay, so Mariam,
Yes.
start your sentence with the indirect object instead. Mr.
Mr. Smith was prescribed
Yeah,
with paracetamol.
yeah. Now, some people out there might be thinking, do you need to have with? Some people don't use with. They just say, the doctor prescribed Mr. Smith paracetamol. They don't do it, but I think it's better in terms of genre and style to put that in. So what color do you think this should be, Mariam? Green or red?
I think it is green. It's flexible.
I think it's green as well. That's good, isn't it?
Yes.
Two of the most common verbs in OET, give and prescribe, they're both really flexible, but explain is not. And that's the thing that can be frustrating about it. We can easily make mistakes with that. So let's just go through prescribe, okay? Everyone, what's the doctor?
The subject.
Subject.
The subject, okay? Doctor's the subject. We'll make the subjects green. Okay, what's the doctor here?
Subject.
In
Subject. Subject, okay.
Subject.
What's prescribe?
Verb.
Verb. Okay, that's the verb. Let's put that in blue. Okay. What's paracetamol?
Direct object.
Direct object.
Direct
Direct
object. Okay, we'll put the direct objects in yellow. Okay. What's Mr. Smith?
Indirect object.
Indirect.
Indirect
Indirect
object. Okay. Indirect. We'll put that in purple. Okay. So I'm in the active, I can put the doctor prescribed and then put the direct object, or I can put the indirect object. Paracetamol, what is it?
Indirect object.
Indirect,
Object.
indirect object or direct object?
Direct.
Direct
Direct
object.
object.
Yeah.
Prescribed. What's that?
Verb.
It's a verb, isn't it?
Was
Okay. Mr. Smith, who's Mr. Smith?
Indirect.
indirect.
Indirect object. Okay, he's the indirect object. Okay, Mr. Smith is the indirect object.
Indirect.
Indirect.
Okay, was prescribed is the
Verb.
verb.
Yes.
Okay, so paracetamol is
Direct.
Direct.
direct object. So prescribe is something that we can do that with. Now, what I'm interested to see, what I'm interested to hear from you guys is what you do when we go and discuss a couple of other ones. Okay, so why don't you go into your groups and tell me what you think of discuss, insert, inject, and diagnose. All of those sentences here, I've given you an active version of it with the direct object. A sentence where after the verb comes the direct object. Each one. So in this one, discussed the diagnosis, inserted the needle, injected morphine, diagnosed psoriasis. Each time after the verb, we've got a direct object. They're all in the direct object line. What I'm interested to see is how you guys reformulate these sentences and see if it's possible. One, how to put this into the passive over here, the first column. Two, whether or not we can use it with the indirect object. And then can we put it into the passive? So is there anyone that's, see, why don't we do this? I'll insert a line here. Above. Yeah, so object type here, active and passive. Let's do those three. We'll do three instead. Okay, we'll do three, and then we'll come back and we'll review them together. Is there anyone that's thinking, oh, I've got no idea what Paul's asking me to do?
So I have an idea, but I have a question, please.
Go on.
I'm a little confused with the explanation of prescribe and explained, because when we were doing the passive, it's the active, yes. When we were doing the active form of explained, the nurse explained Mr. Smith the instruction. It sounded not right in my ears. Then prescribed too, this thing the doctor prescribed Mr. Smith with paracetamol, it also sounded not good in my head.
I know. Well, this is what happens though, isn't it? Okay. There are some, when you learn a new language like this, or when you're learning it in this way, sometimes things don't feel right, or sometimes feel wrong, and sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. And that's why we're doing it today. The reason why I've shown you explain and prescribe is because they're not the same. Even though they should be the same, they feel like they should be the same. They're not. They're different. And no one will explain that to you unless you come to a class. You just pick it up over time. But unfortunately, you guys are trying to improve your grammar quickly for the exam. So I don't think I can explain it any other way, Leah, apart from by saying they're just different. All right. So let's go through and have a look at these three. Discuss, insert, inject. In your groups, I want you to just try and work out what's the passive for the direct object. Can I use it with the indirect object? Okay. And if I do use it with the indirect object, how do I make that passive? So basically, you've got all these three boxes. You have to decide how to fill it or if I should fill it. Okay. Any questions about the exercise? No? That's good. Okay, great. I'll put you into rooms. Don't worry if your group doesn't agree, if you don't 100% have the same answers, or if you don't feel confident, that's fine. We're going to come back and review them. And ultimately, it's through practicing and repeating these things that you get better and better and better at them. So I'm going to open those rooms Now.
Can we?
Mr. Smith discussed.
Whoa. Not
Oh.
yet in your groups. Okay, so I'm going to open those rooms. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do it.
Or
Okay, so
can
we
we
need to
add
get in.
another tricky word of advice?
Advise is another tricky one. Well, maybe we can add that to the list when we get back.
Okay,
All right.
thank
Okay,
you.
so I'm opening those rooms now. I'm going to share into the room for you guys. So go in there. If you're at home, give yourself 5 minutes. Okay. If you're on YouTube watching us here, we do this all the time. If you want to come and